Texas, 1943. A French prisoner stood in the recreation hall, dust motes floating through afternoon light, his eyes fixed on something no one else seemed to notice. For 6 months he had nodded at broken German commands, pointed at meals he wanted, gestured his way through work details. The Americans thought him slow, perhaps damaged by combat. The German prisoners assumed he was simple. But when the first notes of Debussy drifted across the wooden floorboards, his fingers twitched, his breath caught. And in that instant, the careful architecture of silence he had built began to crumble. The summer heat pressed down on Camp Swift, 30 miles east of Austin, transforming the Texas landscape into something that shimmered and wavered at the edges. The camp stretched across former ranch land, geometric rows of tar paper barracks and whitewashed buildings, surrounded by double fences and guard towers that cast long shadows in the late afternoon sun. Among the 15,000 prisoners held there, mostly Germans captured in North Africa, some Italians who had surrendered early, walked a man the records listed simply as André Moreau, French national, captured Normandy region, June 1940. He was 32 years old, lean, dark hair going gray at the temples. He moved through the camp with the cautious economy of someone conserving energy, speaking rarely, and when he did, only in fractured German that made the other prisoners wince. The guards called him Frenchie. The German POWs avoided him. He was neither their enemy nor their ally, just another casualty of the occupation conscripted into Wehrmacht labor battalions before capture. In the complex hierarchy of the camp, he occupied no clear position. He simply existed, a ghost moving between work details and meals, his eyes always watching, his mouth always closed. But Lieutenant James Holloway, the camp's education officer, noticed something the others missed. It was the way Moreau held books in the camp library, the reverence in his touch when he opened a volume, even though he supposedly couldn't read English. The way his eyes moved across pages, not the halting scan of someone struggling with foreign text, but the fluid rhythm of comprehension. You ever notice how the Frenchman looks at those books? Holloway asked Sergeant Bill McKenzie one evening in the administrative office, ceiling fans churning the humid air. McKenzie shrugged, working through paperwork. Half these boys pretend they can't read. Makes them seem less educated, less dangerous. Command likes them simple. Maybe. Holloway lit a cigarette, smoke curling toward the ceiling. Or maybe he's got reasons we don't understand yet. What Holloway couldn't know, what no one in Camp Swift understood, was that André Moreau had grown up in Neuilly-sur-Seine, a wealthy suburb of Paris. His father had been a literature professor at the Sorbonne. His mother, British by birth, had taught him English from infancy. By age 12, he was reading Shakespeare in original text. By 16, he was fluent in 5 languages. When the Wehrmacht rolled through France in 1940, Moreau had been working as a translator for a publishing house. The occupation government had conscripted him immediately. His language skills made him valuable. For 3 years, he had translated German military documents, always careful, always watching for opportunities. And when the chance came to sabotage a communications relay in Normandy, he had taken it. The arrest was swift, the interrogation brutal. But before they could execute him, the Allied invasion began, and in the chaos of retreat, he had been swept up with captured Wehrmacht personnel, processed as a foreign conscript, and shipped to America. No one questioned the story. Foreign laborers were common in the Wehrmacht by 1943. The paperwork was cursory, and Moreau had learned in the darkest days of interrogation that silence, absolute, impenetrable silence, was its own form of armor. If the Americans knew his real background, knew his education, knew his resistance work, the questions would begin. Intelligence officers would arrive. He would be separated, interrogated, examined. His family in France, if they still lived, might face consequences. So he chose invisibility. He chose to become no one worth noticing. The strategy worked perfectly. For 6 months he moved through Camp Swift like smoke, present but not substantial, seen but not remembered. Until the afternoon the piano arrived. The Red Cross truck rumbled through the camp gates on a Thursday in late August, carrying crates of books, sports equipment, and, wrapped carefully in canvas and rope, an upright piano. Educational enrichment, the Red Cross coordinator explained to Holloway, clipboard in hand. Camp morale initiative. Figured you boys could use some culture out here. The piano was old. A Baldwin upright manufactured in 1928. Its mahogany case scarred, but solid. 4 guards and 6 POWs carried it into the recreation hall, a long wooden building that served as theater, chapel, and community center. They positioned it against the far wall, beneath windows that looked out toward the guard towers and fence line. Someone found a stool. The Red Cross coordinator tested middle C, slightly out of tune but functional. Any of you Krauts play? One of the guards asked the German prisoners who had helped carry it. Blank stares, shrugs. One man, Corporal Schmidt, said in broken English, "No music, work only." The guards laughed, not unkindly. Well, hell, somebody here must tickle the ivories. They were wrong, or rather they were asking the wrong people. That evening, after work details ended, and the camp settled into its evening routine, the recreation hall filled with prisoners. Some played cards, others read donated magazines or worked on crafts. Leather tooling was popular, and several men carved intricate designs into belts and wallets they could trade for cigarettes. The piano sat untouched in the corner, silent as a memorial. André Moreau sat at a table near the opposite wall, appearing to study a German-language newspaper, a 2-week-old copy of a propaganda sheet they were allowed to receive. But his eyes kept drifting to the instrument. His fingers, resting on the table, moved in small, involuntary patterns. He was remembering. His mother at their apartment piano playing Fauré while rain tapped the windows. His own lessons, starting at age 7. The feeling of keys beneath his fingers. The way music could transform a room, could transport you out of yourself and into something larger. He hadn't touched a piano in 5 years, not since the occupation, not since the night his mother was arrested for hiding a Jewish family in their cellar. The memory still cut like glass. "Frenchie, you want cigarette?" Moreau looked up. One of the German prisoners, a young man named Otto, stood holding out a pack of Camels. Otto was only 19, captured in Tunisia, still carrying the soft features of adolescence. Moreau shook his head, gestured dismissively. Otto shrugged and moved on. But the interruption had broken something. Moreau stood, folded the newspaper, and walked toward the door. He needed air, needed to not look at the piano anymore. He almost made it. Halfway across the hall, Lieutenant Holloway entered, carrying sheet music under one arm. "Evening, gentlemen. Any musicians among us tonight?" Silence. The card games continued. Someone coughed. Holloway walked to the piano, set down the sheet music, popular songs, jazz standards, some classical pieces. Shame to have this beauty just sitting here. Hell of an instrument, even beat up like it is. He sat at the stool, cracked his knuckles with theatrical flair, and played. What emerged was enthusiastic but clumsy. A boogie-woogie rhythm that approximated music without quite achieving it. Holloway grinned, hammering away, clearly enjoying himself despite the technical shortcomings. Moreau stopped walking. His body went rigid. The lieutenant was murdering the instrument. Wrong fingering, wrong tempo. The piano deserved better. Needed better. Moreau's hands clenched into fists. He told himself to keep walking, to leave, to maintain the silence that kept him safe. But then Holloway shifted into something else, something Moreau recognized immediately. The opening bars of Clair de Lune, Debussy, his mother's favorite. And Holloway was destroying it. The notes came out harsh, disconnected, robbed of their liquid beauty. It wasn't music anymore, just noise shaped like music, and something inside Moreau fractured. He turned, walked back across the hall. Every prisoner watched him now, curious about the strange Frenchman's sudden purpose. Moreau reached the piano, stood beside Holloway. The lieutenant looked up, surprised, still playing. "Yeah, Frenchie, you want to try?" Moreau nodded once. Holloway stood, gestured to the stool. "All yours, pal. Show me how it's done." Moreau sat. The wood was warm from Holloway's weight. The keys were ivory, yellowed with age, some chipped at the edges. He placed his hands in position, left hand on the bass, right on the melody line. The recreation hall went quiet. Card games paused, magazines lowered. Moreau closed his eyes, took a breath, and played. What poured from the Baldwin upright was not the tentative fumbling of an amateur, not the crude approximation of someone who knew a few chords. It was liquid precision. It was years of training, decades of practice. Muscle memory carved so deep it survived prison and war and loss. Debussy's Clair de Lune emerged complete, perfect, each note placed with surgical accuracy. The melody line floated above the rolling accompaniment like moonlight on water, exactly as the composer intended. Moreau's hands moved with the unconscious grace of someone for whom the piano was not an instrument, but an extension of thought itself. The hall transformed. Hardened men who had killed in the North African desert, who had watched friends die in the Tunisia campaign, who carried the weight of brutality in their bones, they stopped moving. The music reached past their defenses, past the carefully maintained prison hierarchy, past the divisions of nationality and allegiance. Lieutenant Holloway stood frozen beside the piano, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion to something else entirely. Because he was educated enough, musical enough, to recognize mastery when he heard it. And Frenchie, simple, silent Frenchie, who supposedly spoke only broken German, was playing like a concert pianist. The piece lasted 4 minutes. When the final notes faded, the silence that followed was profound. No one moved, no one spoke. The evening light through the windows seemed to hold something it hadn't before. Then Moreau opened his eyes, looked at his hands on the keys, and in perfect unaccented English said, "You were playing it too fast. Debussy should breathe." The hall erupted. German prisoners shot to their feet. Guards appeared in doorways. Holloway took a step back, hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm before stopping. "You speak English." Holloway's voice was flat, careful. "You speak English perfectly." Moreau stood from the stool. His face remained calm, but his hands trembled slightly. The architecture of silence was collapsing, and there was no way to rebuild it. "Yes." "How long?" "Since childhood. My mother was British." "Christ." Holloway ran a hand through his hair. "You've been here 6 months. You've listened to every conversation, every briefing, every... Why? Why pretend?" Moreau met his eyes. "Because men who speak 5 languages and play Debussy are interesting, and interesting men get interrogated, separated, examined." He paused. "I wanted to survive the war quietly, Lieutenant, without complications." The German prisoners were shouting now, angry and confused, demanding translations. Otto pushed forward, his young face twisted with betrayal. "Spyin', spy." Moreau switched to German, his fluency shocking them into silence. "Not a spy, just a man trying to be invisible." Sergeant Mackenzie appeared, followed by 2 more guards. "Lieutenant, we got a situation here?" Holloway held up a hand. "Everyone calm down. Nobody's a spy. We just discovered our Frenchman has been holding back on us." He turned to Moreau. "You and me, we need to talk. Office, now." The administrative office was small, crowded with filing cabinets and desks covered in paperwork. A single overhead fan stirred the hot air. Holloway gestured to a chair, and Moreau sat while guards positioned themselves by the door. For a long moment, Holloway just looked at him, reassessing everything he thought he knew about the quiet Frenchman. "Start from the beginning," Holloway said finally, pulling out a notebook. "Real name, real history, and no more bullshit." So Moreau told it. Not everything. There were things that still needed protection, names that couldn't be spoken. But enough. The Paris suburb, the professor father, the British mother who taught him English through bedtime stories and piano lessons, the occupation, the conscription, the small acts of resistance that grew into larger ones. "No. You sabotaged Wehrmacht communications?" Holloway's pen stopped moving. "Jesus, they should have shot you." "They tried." The invasion interrupted. "And you've just been... what? Hiding in plain sight?" Holloway leaned back, the chair creaking. 6 months of grunt work and silence because you figured invisibility was safer than truth? Yes. Moreau's voice was steady. Intelligence officers ask questions. Questions lead to more questions. My family, if they survived, could be punished if the Germans discovered I was active resistance. So I became no one. A simple conscript. A man not worth examining. Holloway studied him. Outside, the evening was settling into night, crickets beginning their song, the camp's searchlights flickering to life. That's the most calculated act of survival I've ever heard, and the loneliest. Something in Moreau's expression shifted. For 6 months he had been stone. Now a crack appeared. Yes. Why break cover now? Why not just walk away from the piano? Moreau looked at his hands. Because it was Debussy, and you were playing it wrong. He smiled slightly sadly. Some things are worth more than strategy, Lieutenant. Even survival strategy. Holloway laughed, sharp and unexpected. You blew 6 months of careful hiding because I butchered Claire de Lune? That's either the most French thing I've ever heard or the craziest. Perhaps both. The guards at the door exchanged glances, unsure what to make of this strange interrogation that felt more like a conversation between colleagues than prisoner and captor. Holloway tapped his pen against the notebook. Here's the situation, Moreau. I need to report this. Command is going to want to know why we had a multilingual former resistance fighter listed as simple labor. There'll be questions, paperwork, probably a transfer to a different facility for proper debriefing. Moreau nodded, resignation settling over him. I understand, but... Holloway held up a finger. I'm also the camp's education officer, and we just got a piano nobody knows how to play. He leaned forward. What if there was another option? One that keeps you here but puts those skills to use? I don't understand. Education and rehabilitation, Moreau. That's what we're supposed to be doing with you prisoners, teaching you democracy, American values, preparing you to rebuild your countries after we win this thing. Music is part of that. Culture, beauty, the things fascism tries to destroy. Moreau's eyes narrowed. You want me to teach? Piano lessons, for any prisoner interested. Germans, Italians, whoever. And maybe some other cultural education. Language lessons, literature discussions. We've got educated men rotting in those barracks with nothing to do but think about the war. Give them something better to think about. Holloway smiled. Plus, I'll be honest, I'd like to learn that Debussy piece properly. Been playing it wrong for years, apparently. For the first time in 6 months, André Moreau felt something close to hope. The arrangement was approved faster than expected. Major Williams, the camp commander, saw the value in productive prisoner activities. The Red Cross endorsed it enthusiastically, and within a week, Moreau had a new designation, Cultural Education Assistant. His barracks assignment changed, moved to a smaller building near the recreation hall. His work details shifted from manual labor to 3 hours each morning helping in the camp library, followed by afternoon and evening availability for lessons. The transformation was remarkable. The invisible man became visible. The silent man found voice. His first student was, surprisingly, Otto. The young German appeared at the recreation hall on a Wednesday afternoon, cap in hand, nervous. I would like to learn, he said in German, if you will teach me. Moreau looked at him. This boy who had offered cigarettes, who had been kind in small ways even when Moreau pretended not to understand. Why piano, Otto? My mother played. Before the war, I would listen when I was supposed to be sleeping. Otto's voice went soft. I want to remember that. The sound of home. Moreau gestured to the piano stool. Then sit. We begin with hand position. Others followed. Corporal Schmidt, who turned out to have a fine ear for music. An Italian prisoner named Giuseppe, who had sung opera in Naples. Even some of the American guards, drawn by the sound of proper music echoing from the recreation hall at night. Lieutenant Holloway came for his lesson on Thursdays. He was a mediocre student. His fingers lacked flexibility, his rhythm wavered, but he applied himself with determination. And slowly, over weeks of practice, Claire de Lune began to emerge from the Baldwin, with something approaching its intended grace. "Better," Moreau said one evening, listening as Holloway worked through the middle section. "You're learning to let the phrases breathe. Only took me 30 years and a French prisoner to figure it out." Holloway smiled. "You're a good teacher, Moreau. Patient. Music requires patience, and these men—" Moreau gestured toward the hall where Otto was practicing scales in the corner. "They need something to build, something that isn't about destruction." The impact rippled through Camp Swift in unexpected ways. The recreation hall became a destination rather than just a waypoint. Men who had spent evenings playing cards or staring at walls began gathering to listen. Some brought letters from home and read them while the music played. Others simply sat, eyes closed, transported somewhere beyond the wire fences. The German prisoner's attitudes toward Moreau shifted from suspicion to something like respect. He wasn't one of them, but he wasn't quite an enemy either. He existed in a strange middle ground, a man whose allegiances were to things larger and more subtle than nations, to music, to beauty, to the human capacity for creating rather than destroying. One evening, as Moreau played Chopin for a gathered crowd, Sergeant Mackenzie pulled Holloway aside. "You notice what's happened?" Mackenzie asked, voice low. "What's that?" "Fights are down 30% since the piano arrived. Discipline issues dropped. Even the worst cases are settling." Mackenzie shook his head in wonder. "It's like the music's doing what months of rules and regulations couldn't." Holloway watched Moreau's hands move across the keys, watched the faces of hardened soldiers softened by sound. "Maybe that's what victory really looks like, Bill. Not tanks and bombs, but this. Men who were told to hate each other sitting in the same room, listening to the same beauty." In late October, the Red Cross delivered mail. Moreau hadn't expected anything. Mail was for soldiers with families who knew where to write. He had deliberately avoided communicating with anyone in France. Every letter could be an intelligence risk, could expose his real history. But there, in the bundle handed to Holloway, was an envelope addressed to André Moreau, Camp Swift, Texas, USA. The return address was Paris. The handwriting was his father's. Holloway brought it to him during an evening lesson. "This came for you, cleared by censors." He handed over the envelope. "Good news, I hope." Moreau's hands shook as he opened it. The letter was dated 6 weeks earlier, written on thin paper that had crossed an ocean and a war to reach him. "Mon fils, we learned through Red Cross channels that you survived, that you are held in America. I cannot express the relief. We thought you dead. Your mother lives. She was released from Drancy camp when the Germans retreated. She is weak, but recovering. We are together again in the apartment, though much has been destroyed. She asks about you constantly, plays your recordings when she has strength. She wants you to know that the piano in the parlor survived. Waited for you through the occupation, through everything. It waits still. Come home when this madness ends. We will make music again." Your father Moreau read it 3 times, then a 4th. The words blurred. He realized he was crying. The first tears he had shed since the night of his arrest. "Hey." Holloway's voice was gentle. "You all right?" "My mother." Moreau's English roughened with emotion. "She survived. They both did." "That's good news, isn't it?" "Yes." Moreau wiped his eyes. "Yes, it's very good news." That night after the recreation hall emptied, Moreau stayed at the piano. He played everything he could remember his mother teaching him. Fauré's Pavane, Satie's Gymnopédies, the French folk songs she had sung while cooking dinner, while hanging laundry, while living an ordinary life before the world went mad. He played until his hands ached, played until the guards on night duty came to check on him, played until the Texas stars wheeled overhead, and the camp sank into deep silence. And in Paris, 5,000 miles away, his mother sat in their scarred apartment, listening to a recorded symphony on their rescued phonograph, and somehow, in that inexplicable way that love transcends distance, felt her son's music reaching across the dark Atlantic. Lieutenant Holloway had an idea. "A concert," he announced one morning in December, bursting into the library where Moreau was cataloging new books. "A proper concert. Christmas program. You play, maybe get some of your students to perform. We'll invite the officers, the guards, maybe some folks from town. Show them what we've been building here. Moreau looked up from his cataloging. A concert. Yeah. Music, culture, democracy in action. Holloway grinned. Come on, Moreau, you've been teaching for 3 months. Time to show the results. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Moreau hadn't performed for an audience since before the war, but the students had progressed. Otto could play simple pieces cleanly. Giuseppe's voice had the recreation hall in tears when he sang "O Holy Night" in Italian. Even Corporal Schmidt had mastered a few folk songs. We would need time to prepare, Moreau said carefully. We've got 3 weeks until Christmas. That enough? Perhaps. Moreau set down his cataloging pen. If we work hard. The next 3 weeks transformed Camp Swift. The recreation hall became a rehearsal space. Moreau coached his students through pieces, fine-tuning dynamics, perfecting tempo, building their confidence. Guards volunteered to build a small stage. Someone donated a microphone and speaker system. Word spread beyond the camp. The mayor of Austin heard about it. Local newspapers picked up the story. POW camp to host Christmas concert. German prisoners perform classical music. Major Williams was cautious. You sure about this, Holloway? It's one thing to have them playing for themselves. But a public concert? That's making a statement. Yes, sir, it is. The statement is that even in war, even among enemies, human beings can create something beautiful together. That's worth making public. Williams thought about it, nodded slowly. All right, but keep it dignified. No propaganda, no politics, just music. Just music, Holloway agreed. December 23rd, 1943. The evening was cool by Texas standards, temperature dropping into the 40s as the sun set. The recreation hall filled with people, camp officers in dress uniforms, guards with their families, townspeople curious and cautious, reporters with notebooks. The German and Italian prisoners sat in a designated section, nervous but proud. They wore their cleanest uniforms. Some had shaved carefully. This wasn't just a concert, it was a chance to be seen as human beings again, not just enemy combatants. Moreau stood backstage, really just a curtained section near the piano, and felt his heart hammering. His hands were sweating. The old performance anxiety came flooding back, unchanged by war and imprisonment. Otto appeared beside him. Are you nervous, Herr Moreau? Very. Good. My mother said the best musicians are always nervous. Means you care. Otto smiled. We will do well tonight. Yes, Moreau said, yes, we will. Yes, we... Lieutenant Holloway walked out first, took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. What you're about to hear is something special. These men, prisoners of war from nations fighting against us, have spent the last 3 months learning music, practicing together, creating beauty in a place designed for security and control. I think that says something hopeful about human nature. Please welcome our performers. The applause was tentative at first, uncertain. The audience didn't know how to respond to enemy soldiers as entertainers. Then Otto walked out, sat at the piano, and began to play. It was a simple piece, a Bach minuet, carefully chosen for his skill level. But Otto played it with such earnest concentration, such visible effort, that the audience leaned forward. They could see him counting in his head, see his hands shaking slightly, see the enormous courage it took to perform for people who had every right to hate him. When he finished, the applause was warmer, genuine. Giuseppe sang next. His voice filled the hall with an Italian aria that needed no translation. The emotion transcended language. Several women in the audience wiped their eyes. Corporal Schmidt played German folk songs on the piano, simple melodies that spoke of home and longing. An American guard joined him playing harmonica, and together they created something that was neither German nor American but universal. Then it was Moreau's turn. He walked to the piano, sat, looked out at the audience, this strange mixture of captors and captives, civilians and soldiers, people who should be enemies but for this moment were just listeners. He had chosen his pieces carefully. First, The Star-Spangled Banner, a respectful nod to his host country. The audience rose, hands over hearts, and Moreau played it with precision and dignity. Then he shifted into something else, something unexpected, the opening notes of La Marseillaise, the French national anthem, the song of revolution, of liberty, of resistance. The audience froze, uncertain. Was this allowed? Was it appropriate? But Moreau played it not as a political statement but as a prayer. Slowly, with profound tenderness, he transformed the martial anthem into a meditation on loss and hope. He played for his mother in her apartment, for his father waiting for peace, for the France that had been occupied but not destroyed. When he finished, the silence was absolute. Then Major Williams stood, began to clap. Slow, measured applause that others joined until the hall thundered with it. Because they understood. All of them. Americans and Germans, officers and prisoners, townspeople and guards. They understood that this wasn't about taking sides or claiming victory. It was about surviving. About holding on to the things that made life worth living, even in the middle of darkness. Moreau ended with Debussy. Clair de Lune, played exactly as his mother had taught him, exactly as it should be played. And in that recreation hall in Central Texas, surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers, 500 people experienced something approaching transcendence. André Moreau was repatriated to France in May 1945, part of the first wave of Allied nationals released from American POW camps. He carried with him three things: the letter from his father, now worn soft with rereading, a photograph of his students at Camp Swift, signed by each of them, and a small harmonica given to him by Sergeant Mackenzie. He returned to Paris on a gray morning, the city scarred but standing. His parents met him at the train station. His mother was thin, her hair gone completely white, but she wrapped him in arms that still held their old strength. That evening, they sat at the piano in their apartment, the same piano that had somehow survived occupation and liberation. She played, then he played, and together they wept for the lost years and celebrated the found ones. Lieutenant Holloway wrote to him once. The letter arrived in June 1946, forwarded through Red Cross channels. Dear Moreau, thought you'd want to know. The piano program continued after you left. We've had over 200 prisoners go through music lessons. Some of them are damn good. Otto sends his regards. He's back in Hamburg, teaching music to children. Says you taught him more than piano. I finished that Debussy piece properly. Took me another year, but I got it. You were right about letting it breathe. The world's still broken in 1,000 ways. But I think about that Christmas concert sometimes, and I remember that broken things can still make beautiful sounds. Your friend, Jim Holloway. Moreau kept the letter with his other precious things. Years later, when he became a professor of music at the Paris Conservatory, he would tell his students the story of Camp Swift, not to glorify war or imprisonment, but to illustrate a principle he believed absolutely: that silence can be survival, that music can be resistance, and that the human need to create beauty is more powerful than any force that tries to destroy it. The Baldwin upright piano remained in Camp Swift's recreation hall until 1947. When the camp closed, it was purchased by a church in Austin, where it served for another 30 years. Generations of children learned on it, pressed the same keys André Moreau had pressed, unknowingly connecting to a story of courage and art and the refusal to be made invisible. In 1973, the church upgraded to a grand piano, and the Baldwin was donated to a small music school. On the inside of the lid, someone discovered an inscription carved carefully into the wood, done with the precision that comes from patience and purpose. Music is the silence between notes and the courage to play them anyway. A.M. 1943.